I mean, what have you been able to do since you started using the Fairlight that you couldn't do before?
It gives me much more control over arrangements, particularly, and it affects so many different areas. As soon as I start writing now, I'm working with a sound that is sparking off a particular atmosphere. When you sit down and write at the piano, the sound of the piano is not as different as brass and strings, etc. And I think it really affects the whole flavour of the song, like the difference between writing on a piano and a guitar that may be amplified by 100 times because of all the different sounds that you have.
What songs of the album did you write on the Fairlight, and what did you write on piano?
There were very few tracks on this album that I wrote on the piano. Running Up That Hill, Hands of Love, Watching You Without Me, most of them were Fairlight based. Cloud Busting I wrote on the Fairlight, and I just thought it would be much more interesting with real strings, so we transcribed the Fairlight arrangement for string players to read, and then they redid it.
I mean, there are other people using Fairlight now too, right? Like Simple Minds and Thomas Dolby. Have you heard their records?
I've heard some of Simple Minds stuff, yes. I think the Fairlight is one of those instruments that is definitely in there now. When it first came out, it was so expensive that I think it prohibited people from getting close to it, getting to know it. But it seems to have conquered that barrier now, and it's available in studios at least, and people can get to use it. And I think it will be on so many things from now on.
We're going to change the subject now. I mean, do you see a connection between mysticism and science?
I don't know. I'm sure there is. I think there's a connection between everything. I think everything is linked up somehow. You just got to find where they meet.
Do you consider yourself a religious person?
That's a question that I get asked a lot, and some people come in and they're so convinced that I'm of a particular order. And I think everyone has something in them that is seeking some kind of religion. But whether I call myself a religious person, I don't think so, no. But I think I'm fascinated by religious imagery. I think most people are. And it's one of those things that has an incredibly extreme effect on people. And that, from a writer's point of view, is fascinating.
Are there any writers who have really influenced you a lot, like print writers like Bill Gurdjieff or anyone like that you want to talk about?
I don't know if there are any writers that have really influenced me. Particular books certainly have, but again they're much more on a novel level rather than a reality level.
Well, let's have a couple of examples.
I used to read quite a lot of Kurt Vonnegut and C.S. Lewis when I was a kid was one of my biggest ones. I also think when you're very little, like I don't know if you ever read fairy stories by your mother, I think those kind of things get in very, very deep. And when I was really little, one of my favourite writers was Oscar Wilde and his fairy stories. And I actually think they got in quite deep. I think his sense of tragedy and poetry is something that still moves me very much.
Listen, I didn't know he had fairy stories.
Yes, he does indeed.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, and they're beautiful.
Oh, can you describe one?
Well, one of them, excuse me, I'm just trying to think what it's called, I don't know. Oh, yeah. The Happy Prince is one of his stories. It's about this huge statue that stands in the middle of a city, and it's incredibly beautiful. It's coated in gold, his eyes are rubies, he just sparkles. He's a beautiful statue of a prince. And there's a little swallow who's flown in and nests at the feet of the statue overlooking the city. And the statue speaks to the swallow and says, does he realise how much poverty and sadness is going on in the city? So bit by bit, the little swallow strips the statue of the gold and the rubies and distributes it around the city to all the poor people. So eventually the prince is just like a lead blob. His eyes are taken, so he's blind, and he's just left completely alone. All his great finery has gone to the poor. And it's winter, and the swallow should really migrate, or it will die. And the swallow will not leave him. And the tragedy is the closeness between them, that the swallow should go or it will die, and how beautiful he was, and now he's completely stripped, and the little swallow dies, and eventually they just sort of pull the statue down and stick him in the dump. But the way it's written, and it's so beautiful and so sad. And there was one, you know, at the point where the swallow was discovered, I always used to cry as a child.
I mean, so you like to write songs like that, then, that are sort of like so archetypal in a way?
I think his sense of tragedy and telling a story attracts me tremendously, and I think it's very similar in a way to a lot of the traditional music that I was again influenced by when I was very little, by my family. My brothers were really into folk music, and a lot of folk music is so into telling stories, and it's in a way something that doesn't feature so much in contemporary music anymore. I think contemporary music is used to help relationships a lot of the time. Like, you know, you go to the disco and you meet someone, so you have a song and it's your song, and it's more about that than actually telling stories like the traditional things are. And I think that's a big fascination for me.
Well, is this a recent thing? Like on your last couple of albums, I've noticed a lot more like jigs and stuff and folk instrumentation. Is this a direction that you're going in more?
I think I've always been really influenced by it, but I haven't been able to express it through my songs. It's weird trying to talk about the process of writing, but it does actually take over you, and you don't have control over it beyond a certain point. And it's only really, I suppose, the last couple of albums where I feel I've had enough control over the process to be able to express the influences that are in there. And particularly the Irish one. I've wanted to work with Irish musicians and the pipes and fiddles for a long time, but haven't really had anywhere in my music for them.
Could you talk about your brothers a bit and how they've affected you in your being a creative person, not just like in the sounds that have come out on the album?
We're a very close family.